Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a massive stack of sources, primarily centering around the strategic philosophy laid out in Val's cookbook, and diving into the surprising sweet science of dessert baking.
Yeah, and this isn't going to be a recipe session.
No, not at all. This is a strategy deep dive. It's custom design, really, to take you from being, a nervous beginner to a confident, intentional baker.
And it's so important that we frame it that way. I mean, most people approach baking like it's some kind of magical ritual. They just follow the steps and then hope for a miracle.
Right, fingers crossed.
Exactly. But Val's approach just flips that on its head.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes that baking is intense precision, it's deep history, and it's applied chemistry.
So what we're here to do is distill those core principles.
Yes, so that when something goes wrong, and it will, it always does, you know exactly why it went wrong and, more importantly, how to pivot.
Exactly. Our mission today is to cut through all the noise, the comparison culture on social media, the consumer clutter,
All the gadgets you're told you need.
and just give you the blueprint for confidence. We're distilling the principles of baking so you can step into the kitchen feeling, well, prepared, not pressured.
And that means we're tackling the big questions that Val poses right at the start, for the novice baker. What is dessert's actual role? Is it ever functional, or is it always just this indulgence? Right.
Yeah.
And what are the absolute non-negotiable essentials we actually need to buy? And maybe most importantly, how do we translate the confusing jargon of recipes like creaming or folding into practical, understandable techniques?
Before we even touch the measuring spoons, though, we have to grasp Val's philosophical core.
Yes.
Val basically says that baking is discipline in disguise. It demands attention, it demands patience, and an absolute respect for the process, the ingredients, the timing.
It's never just about satisfying a late-night craving.
No, historically, it has always been a ritual of status, of celebration, or even of sacrifice. We are tapping into something deeply, deeply human here.
And Val's whole philosophy is that you can't really master the process until you respect the history of the materials themselves. The fact that the process requires so much attention to detail, the exact temperature, the correct measurement, it forces a kind of discipline.
And that discipline is the real reward.
That's the real reward, far beyond whatever you end up tasting at the end.
Okay, so let's unpack this history first, because understanding where sweetness came from really explains why it holds such psychological weight for us today.
It really does.
It wasn't just another food group. It was like currency, it was status, and it was ritual.
That's such a key distinction. Sweetness wasn't a casual thing until very, very recently in human history. I mean, we can trace the earliest evidence of, intentional sweetbreads all the way back to the ancient Egyptians, around 2600 BCE.
Wow, that far back.
Yeah. And of course, they weren't using granulated white sugar like we do. They relied on natural sweeteners, mostly honey, often mixed with nuts, fruit, and sometimes spices like ginger or cinnamon.
And what's so interesting is how quickly that practice spread.
Yeah.
The Persians adapted it, and then as the early trade routes developed, they refined the techniques. They started introducing really luxurious ingredients into early pastries, things like rose water and saffron.
Which were incredibly expensive.
Oh, incredibly costly, which immediately cemented the status of sweet baked goods as these, symbols of wealth and power.
And if you fast forward to the Middle Ages in Europe, sugar itself becomes the ultimate status symbol. It was just tremendously scarce, imported across vast distances, and wildly expensive.
So if you had sugar, you were basically showing off.
You were showing off some serious wealth, yes. It was often reserved exclusively for royalty or, the absolute elite of the merchant class.
And you can see that reflected in the desserts from that time. If you look at, say, medieval feasts, the desserts were usually these rich but simple fruit or nut-based pies, sometimes sweetened with a bit of honey or very, very tiny amounts of sugar.
But the real display of power came in the form of what they called subtleties.
Okay, what is a subtlety?
Well, and this is a term that a beginner should understand to really get the context. These weren't necessarily meant to be eaten.
Wait, really?
No. Subtleties were these elaborate, often non-edible sugar sculptures, miniature castles, coats of arms, mythological scenes, all crafted purely from sugar paste. It wasn't an ingredient, it was an architectural medium.
Just to flaunt your extravagance.
It was pure theater.
And we absolutely cannot talk about the global spread of sugar without addressing the profound colonial cost. The source material is very, very direct on this.
It has to be.
The shift from sugar as this luxury item to sugar as a common kitchen staple, which massively expanded dessert making, was entirely reliant on the brutal system of colonial sugar plantations.
That historical context is vital. The immense scale of sugar production, especially in the Caribbean and the Americas, was fueled by enslaved labor. The cost of that sweetness is, well, it's immeasurable.
So when we think about the abundance of sugar in our modern pantry,
You're standing on a historical foundation that was defined by exploitation. And this really informs Val's philosophy that baking should be approached with respect, a kind of quiet acknowledgement of the labor and the history that's inherent in every single ingredient.
so if you trace that history from a status symbol to this painful commodity, it connects directly to how we view dessert today.
As something set apart.
Something special, a reward.
This is where we see that cultural elevation. I mean, look at France. Patisserie culture took the raw act of baking and elevated it to a fine art, a codified science. It wasn't just about feeding people anymore.
No, it was about precision.
Precision, aesthetic beauty, and technique. The whole performance of dessert.
And that focus on ritual isn't just in France. In Italy, you have bakes like panettone or biscotti that are so deeply rooted in family tradition and ritual. They're often tied to holidays, specific dates, with recipes passed down with this almost sacred reverence.
And in the East, you have cultures where baking interacts, profoundly with philosophy. Think of traditional Japanese wagashi.
Oh, they're beautiful.
They're not just sweets. They are meticulously crafted, often miniature sculptures designed to reflect the current season or to accompany a formal tea ceremony. They're all about balance, aesthetics, ceremony. It demands a kind of spiritual patience from the artisan.
Or in the Middle East with layered, delicate pastries like baklava or mamoul. They're so intricately connected to weddings, religious holidays like Ramadan, or just welcoming guests.
They're profound cultural symbols. They symbolize abundance, fertility, or spiritual reward. The baker is performing an act of creation, really, and preservation.
Val describes the act of baking, the mixing, the waiting, trusting the rise, as an act of alchemy.
It is alchemy. It's taking four simple common substances, flour, fat, water, sugar, and transforming them through heat and time into something entirely new. The patience required is a spiritual discipline.
Which finally brings us to the first big strategic question for the beginner, especially in our modern context of, all this dietary confusion.
Right.
Can dessert ever be a functional meal? Or is it always just an indulgence we should feel guilty about?
And Val is very clear on this. We need to break the myth that dessert equals indulgence, which equals bad.
It's a toxic cycle.
It is. Yeah. That mindset just leads to shame and then binging, which is totally counterproductive. The strategic answer is that dessert can function as a snack, a supplement, or even a meal, provided it's made with intention and minimal processing.
Okay, so we're talking about meal-ish desserts, bakes that naturally incorporate more protein or fiber or whole food structure. Can you give us some examples of what an intentional bake looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Think about the classic, reliable banana bread. If you bake it yourself, using minimal oil, and then you pair a slice with some nut butter.
You've got a balanced snack right there.
We have fat, fiber, complex carbohydrates, and protein. It functions far more like a balanced energy bar than a slice of, highly processed cake. The same goes for oatmeal bars loaded with seeds and dried fruit, or even a sweet potato pie using whole milk and eggs.
And what about things like protein-rich custards and puddings? They use eggs, milk, yogurt.
Precisely. They offer significant satiety because that protein and fat content slows down the absorption of the sugars. When you bake at home, you control the type and the amount of sugar, and you completely eliminate the trans fats and the chemical stabilizers you find in commercial products.
So homemade is just inherently better.
It's inherently superior.
But we do have to acknowledge the real nutritional concerns that drive this guilt, which is, primarily the refined sugar overload.
Absolutely. Refined sugar, especially when it's combined with highly processed flour and unhealthy fats, it causes blood sugar spikes, contributes to systemic inflammation. It's a real issue. However, Val's strategic tip here is crucial.
Which is?
Restriction is not a strategy. Pleasure is part of nutrition. The pleasure you get from a satisfying homemade bake can reduce stress and provide emotional comfort. And that is part of your overall well-being.
So instead of demonizing an entire category of food, the strategy is more about self-assessment.
Yes. Val instructs the learner to just ask a simple question. What does my body need right now? Do I need fuel, comfort, joy, or focus? If you need sustained energy, you choose a mealish bake like an oatmeal bar. If you need comfort or celebration, you choose a decadent cookie, but you limit the portion.
So it's about aligning the bake with your current need.
Exactly. Not just blindly consuming a processed item out of habit. It's about being deliberate.
That transition from philosophical intention to tactical preparation is perfect. If we're going to bake with intention, we need the right tools, but Val's philosophy says we need to minimize the clutter.
Yes.
Let's start with the strategist pantry. What are the absolute non-negotiables?
We're looking for versatility and reliability. And the core stock list is surprisingly small. All-purpose flour. It's the backbone, really. It have a balanced protein content that's suitable for most bakes. Then you need granulated sugar, brown sugar.
Okay, adds that moisture and depth.
From the molasses.
Yeah.
And then baking powder, baking soda, and salt.
And for the wet essentials?
Eggs. They act as binders, emulsifiers, and leaveners. And unsalted butter, always unsalted for versatility, because that allows you, the baker, to control the salt content precisely. And finally, vanilla extract and some form of milk or an alternate milk.
That's maybe 10 items. That's incredibly manageable.
It is. And then Val lists a few optional but very common additions. These items expand your repertoire to like 80% of recipes without needing a specialty trip. So cocoa powder, chocolate chips, the basic warming spices like cinnamon and nutmeg.
And lemon juice or white vinegar.
Yeah.
That one's interesting.
It's your secret weapon acid source. If a recipe calls for buttermilk and you don't have it, you just add a teaspoon of acid lemon juice or vinegar to regular milk, let it sit for 5 minutes, and you've created your own buttermilk substitute.
That feels like a critical improvisational skill.
It is, and it relies on understanding the chemistry of leavening, which we're definitely going to get into.
Okay, now let's talk tools. We need leverage, not a full-on professional kitchen renovation.
The essential tools are so minimal. A large and a medium mixing bowl, preferably stainless steel or glass. They help with temperature regulation. A good whisk and a sturdy rubber spatula. And, crucially, precise measuring cups and measuring spoons.
Because baking is chemistry.
It's chemistry. Volume matters. Then a sheet pan with parchment paper and a standard 8x8 baking dish or loaf pan. Val says very clearly that a hand mixer is optional but helpful, especially for the creaming step. But nothing beyond that is necessary to achieve professional level results when you're starting out.
Okay, I have to pause here and challenge this a little. I get avoiding clutter, but if I'm trying to get a perfect creamed mixture of butter and sugar, isn't that 10 minutes of vigorous hand mixing a huge barrier to entry for a beginner?
That's a really fair point, and it speaks directly to Val's core tenet of discipline. The stand mixer is expensive, yes, but more importantly, Val believes it automates the most fundamental step of learning, which is feel.
The feel of the batter.
Exactly. When you cream butter and sugar by hand, or even with a basic hand mixer, you learn what light and fluffy feels like, what it looks like, what it sounds like. You learn to listen to the change in friction as the mixture traps air.
So the clutter trap is really a confidence and skill trap in disguise.
Precisely. If you skip that initial tactile learning, you become dependent on this expensive machine, and you haven't mastered the sensory cues you need to recognize a properly aerated batter.
So Val's rule stands.
It stands. If you aren't sure you will love baking, start with the inexpensive essentials. Don't invest in the stand mixer until you've successfully done the 6-bake sampler twice.
That makes perfect sense. Now let's talk about the other consumer traps beginners should avoid, using Val's rule. If you can't explain what it's for in one sentence, don't buy it yet.
Right. So beyond the stand mixer, you should avoid those specialized, high-end, heavy-duty commercial pans. Your technique matters way more than the type of metal your pan is made of when you're starting out.
And all the decorating stuff.
Avoid the fancy decorating tools, elaborate piping bags, stencils, silicone molds.
Just focus on flavor, not flair.
Exactly. Don't worry about the aesthetics of your crumb structure until you've mastered the flavor and the texture. Also, avoid those rare niche extracts, almond, rose, lavender, until you've perfected vanilla and cocoa. You need fundamental mastery before you start complicating the flavor profile.
So the path to confidence is through understanding the why, which brings us to the strategic heart of this whole thing. Baking is science with soul. Let's break down the rules of the road, the 4 forces that govern every single bake.
Understanding these 4 forces, gas, protein, fat, and sugar, it gives you the strategic freedom to improvise, to recover mid-bake, and even to invent your own recipes eventually.
So you stop following a recipe robotically.
And you start thinking like a chemist.
Let's start with gas. What is it and what does it do?
Gas is just leavening. It's what makes your bake rise. This gas can be created in four primary ways: chemically,
Mhm.
with baking soda or powder; biologically, with yeast; mechanically, with air incorporated through whisking or creaming; or thermally, with steam.
Like in puff pastry.
Exactly. Gas creates these tiny pockets, it expands the batter volume, and creates that light, airy structure we look for in cakes and breads.
Okay, next up is protein. This is the scaffolding.
Protein is the structure. This primarily comes from gluten in flour, or from the coagulation of proteins in eggs. Think of it like a rigid net or a microscopic scaffold. As the bake heats up, the liquid evaporates, the gas expands, and the protein cooks, which sets the scaffold.
So without enough protein.
Your bake would just collapse into a puddle.
And the tension between that gas and the protein is mediated by the third force, fat. That's your butter, your oil, your shortening.
And fat is responsible for tenderness, richness, mouthfeel. It achieves this by actively getting in the way of gluten formation.
How does that work?
Here's a good way to think about it. Imagine fat particles are like tiny waterproof umbrellas. When you mix fat into flour, these umbrellas coat the individual flour particles. Now, water is what's needed to activate the gluten-forming proteins.
But the fat is blocking the water.
Right. If the fat is covering the flour, it prevents the water from making those strong, elastic connections. So a high-fat cookie is tender and chewy because the gluten hasn't overdeveloped. Compare that to a fat-free bread, which is meant to be tough and elastic.
That distinction between tough and tender is completely dependent on that fat-protein relationship.
It is. And the final force, sugar, is a triple threat. I mean, beyond just sweetness, it handles color and moisture.
How does sugar handle moisture?
Sugar is intensely hygroscopic, which is just a fancy way of saying it loves water. It acts like a powerful moisture magnet, binding water molecules within the big structure.
Ah, so that's why a high-sugar cake stays moist for days.
Right? Whereas a low-sugar, high-flour cake will dry out very quickly. And sugar is also critical for browning. It aids both caramelization, the browning of the sugar itself, and the Maillard reaction, which is that complex chemical reaction between sugars and proteins that creates hundreds of delicious flavor compounds and that beautiful golden brown crust.
What's fascinating here is that if you understand these four forces, gas, protein, fat, sugar, you can look at a failure like a collapsed cake and immediately start troubleshooting.
You can. Was there too little gas? Too weak a protein structure? Did the fat melt out too quickly? That knowledge just gives the beginner immense power.
It shifts baking from magic to mastery.
Knowing the why allows for those strategic substitutions we talked about. If your bread is too tough, you know you overdeveloped the protein by overmixing. If your cookie spread too much, you know your fat was too warm or you didn't have enough flour to support the structure.
So let's move to the physical skills that support these forces. What are the crucial starter techniques that allow the learner to execute the science correctly?
Okay, number one is the creaming method. This is absolutely vital for lift in cakes, muffins, and most trop cookies. It involves beating room temperature butter and sugar together until the mixture is visibly lighter in color and has significantly increased in volume.
That light and fluffy instruction you always see.
That's the one. And the goal here is not just combining the ingredients. The goal is mechanical leavening, trapping millions of microscopic air pockets within the fat. These trapped air pockets are your first source of gas.
And they expand in the oven.
They expand dramatically when they hit the oven's heat, giving your bake its initial vital lift. If your butter is too cold, the air can't be trapped. If it's too warm or melted, the air immediately escapes.
Okay, second technique is folding. This usually comes into play when you have a very light ingredient, like whipped egg whites, and you need to mix it into a heavier batter.
Folding is all about gentle incorporation. You use a specific motion cutting down the center with a spatula and then sweeping up and over the side of the bowl. It has to be gentle because you're trying to preserve all that precious air you work so hard to incorporate.
And you just stir it.
You deflate the whole mixture and you'll end up with a dense, heavy product. Folding is the technique that truly demands patience.
Which leads directly to the third cardinal rule of baking. Do not overmix.
Right. Once you introduce liquid to flour, gluten development begins. As we discussed, gluten creates structure. For delicate bakes like cakes or cookies, you want some structure, but not too much.
So excessive stirring is the enemy.
It overdevelops the gluten, which creates an overly elastic, tough, or rubbery result. The key is to stop mixing the second you see the last streak of flour disappear. Leave small lumps. They will disappear during baking, I promise.
And finally, a simple but critical tactical step. Proper measuring, specifically of flour.
This is where most beginner failures happen. If a recipe calls for 1 cup of flour, and you scoop the measuring cup directly into the bag, you compact the flour, you can often add 25% to 50% more flour than you're supposed to.
And that excess flour just ruins the bake.
It throws off the whole moisture balance,
Huh?
resulting in a dry, dense product. The rule is always to spoon the flour lightly into the measuring cup and then use a straight edge like the back of a knife to level it off.
It seems like such a small detail, but the precision is everything.
It is, because baking is a rigid chemical equation. And the most volatile variable in that equation is, ironically, the one thing you rely on most: the oven.
Val calls the oven a wild card.
And for good reason. Every home oven lies. The dial on the front can be wildly inaccurate, sometimes running 25 to 50 degrees hotter or colder than what you set it to.
Which can ruin delicate bakes.
It can ruin them before they even set. So the single most inexpensive yet essential tool for confidence is a simple oven thermometer. You need real accuracy to achieve consistency.
And even if the temperature is correct, you still have to deal with uneven heating.
Absolutely. Most home ovens have hot spots, especially near the back or the sides. If your cake is browning on one side but not the other, it means you need to rotate your pan halfway through the bake. Getting to know your oven's moods is part of that long-term discipline Val preaches.
What are the big oven mistakes that cause, catastrophic failure?
Skipping the preheat is a huge one. That initial burst of heat is essential for activating the chemical leaveners and setting the protein structure rapidly. If you put cold batter into a cold oven, the bake just slowly melts before it can rise.
You get a dense, flat product.
Right. And the other classic mistake? Opening the oven door too soon.
The temptation is always there.
It is. But for cakes and quick breads that rely on baking powder or soda, the structure isn't fully set until about 2/3 of the way through. If you open that door, you release the critical heat and steam, causing a sudden temperature drop.
And then it sinks.
The expanding gas contracts, and the unstable protein structure collapses. You get that heartbreaking sunken center. You have to wait until the recipe says the bake is nearly done, or at least until the smell is overwhelming.
So we have the science, we have the tools, now we need the mindset. If baking is discipline in disguise, the hidden ingredient has to be patience. The act of waiting is so deeply integrated into every stage.
And the waiting isn't passive. It's where all the essential chemistry and transformation happen. We see this in 3 major stages. First, chilling dough. This firms up the fat, which is essential to control the spread of cookies or to stabilize a pie crust.
It also helps the flour.
It allows the flour to fully hydrate, which results in a more tender crumb.
Second, the preheating we just talked about.
Yep, that 15 to 20 minutes of waiting for the oven to stabilize is non-negotiable for success. And third, the cooling stage. This is maybe the hardest one for a beginner to respect because the cake is right there, smelling incredible.
But you have to wait.
You must wait until the cake, or the bread or the pie, is fully cooled before you try to frost it, slice it, or handle it.
And why exactly does cooling prevent that structural failure?
Well, a cake fresh out of the oven is chemically unstable. The interior is still undergoing residual cooking, and the fats and proteins are still soft. If you slice it too soon, the steam releases unevenly, and the interior structure, which is reliant on that heat setting the proteins, will just crumble.
And frosting a warm cake is a disaster.
The heat just melts the fat in the frosting, and you get greasy, sliding layers. Patience allows the final, solid structure to set and for condensation to evaporate properly.
Now, unfortunately, waiting and trying to do precise chemistry often leads to what we perceive as failure. Let's look at the common beginner mistakes, but reframe them as learning opportunities the way Val does.
Okay, let's start with the leavening substitution mistake. Beginners often assume baking soda and baking powder are interchangeable. They are not.
Let's break down the science here because this is where precision is paramount.
All right, so baking powder is a complete chemical leavener. It contains both the base, which is baking soda, and the acid, usually cream of tartar, that are needed for activation. Plus a stabilizer, like cornstarch. It generally activates twice, once when you mix it with liquid, and again when heat is applied.
So you can use it in almost any batter.
Pretty much. But baking soda, or sodium bicarbonate, is pure base. To release its carbon dioxide gas, it requires an added acid. Think of it like a battery that needs a circuit to work. The acid, be it buttermilk, lemon juice, brown sugar, molasses, is the circuit.
And if there's no acid?
If a recipe calls for baking soda and you don't have an acid ingredient, the soda will just sit there. It won't provide any rise, and it often leaves a weird metallic soapy taste.
So if I accidentally use baking powder instead of baking soda in a buttermilk recipe, I'm missing out on that vital acid interaction.
You've changed the fundamental chemistry of the bake. But Val's insight is that when you make this mistake, you've learned the role of an acid. Every mistake is just feedback on the tools, the ingredients, or the timing.
So if you burn the bottom of your cookies,
You now know that your sheet pan is too dark, or you need to double layer the pan, or that you need to rotate it sooner. You've gained invaluable sensory awareness.
it's like a baptism by batter. You've leveled up because you built a specific trust with your unique kitchen environment.
Precisely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the biggest hurdle for the beginner today isn't really the chemistry, it's the comparison. We have to address the anxiety created by the decorating trap and social media pressure, which Val spends a lot of time unpacking.
Oh, the pressure is immense. Every bake you see on your feed is flawless, impossibly tall, and perfectly frosted.
And Val is absolutely adamant about this. Decorating is not essential when you're starting. Your priority must be texture, structure, and flavor. A simple dusting of powdered sugar or a rustic glaze is all you need. Focus on the interior life of the cake.
It's nice, but it doesn't feed you.
That phrase is a mantra. We have to inject a necessary reality check here. We are consuming highly produced content. Food shows, Instagram reels, they're created by professionals with studio lighting, edited cuts, hidden prep work, food stylists, professional decorators.
That is not a mirror reflecting your starting line.
It's advertising.
Val identifies what we can call the 3 C's of the social media comparison trap for beginners.
The first C is context collapse. A beginner sees a filtered, stylized photo and believes, mine doesn't look like that, therefore I failed. They lose the context of the messy process, the 3 failed batches, and the hour of cleanup that came before that final 10-second reel.
The second C is confidence erosion. Beginners think, I'll never be that good. They mistake a professional's lifetime of practice for some kind of innate talent, and it's paralyzing.
And the third C is concealment. The pressure to share only perfect results makes the beginner think this is too messy or ugly to share. They internalize the mistake rather than externalizing it as a learning opportunity. This concealment prevents community and learning.
So what is Val's strategy against this paralyzing pressure?
Val says, mess is where the mastery begins. You cannot learn to handle a delicate pastry or achieve a smooth buttercream if you are afraid of getting flour everywhere or having a batch look, wonky. Decorate if it brings you sincere joy, not if it's born from pressure or the pursuit of impossible perfection. Skill is built with disciplined practice, not polish.
Which leads directly to the core of the psychological strategy, separating the bake from the baker.
Val's grounding advice is so simple and profound. Your bake is not your worth. A cracked cheesecake doesn't mean you are chaotic or incapable, and a collapsed cake doesn't mean you lack discipline or character.
It's just feedback.
The result is simply feedback on the chemical equation you attempted.
So what should a beginner do when they encounter a failure?
Get curious, not critical. Don't throw it out and swear off baking forever. Instead, pick it apart. What was the temperature of the butter? Did I measure the flour correctly? Did the recipe call for soda or powder? Treat your first bakes like maps, not masterpieces. They show you where the pitfalls are in your kitchen and with your technique, which is essential knowledge.
Bake small, fail small, learn big.
Exactly. The discipline you are truly learning is resilience.
Okay, so once you've internalized that mindset of curiosity and resilience, the next strategic step is to actively find your baking lane.
Yes. Val's insight is that mastery doesn't require expertise in every single category of baking. You need to explore the terrain and see what clicks with your personality and your lifestyle.
So we're introducing Val's Baking Sampler, 6 starter recipes, 1 for each major dessert category. This allows you to build core techniques while figuring out what kind of baking you actually enjoy, the rhythm, the texture, the challenge.
This sampler is designed to provide maximum learning with minimal complexity. Each bake teaches a core skill that is transferable across the entire spectrum of dessert making. Let's walk through them.
We start with the ultimate comfort classic, cookies, specifically the classic chocolate chip drop style.
This is low risk, high reward, and it's highly forgiving. The core technique it teaches is the creaming method, getting that butter and sugar beaten just right to trap air. It forces you to pay attention to ingredient temperature and bake timing.
So you figure out if you like that process.
Yeah. If you enjoy the rhythmic act of creaming, shaping, and managing batches, your baking lane might be cookies, bars, and drop scones. The test question for you is, did you like the rhythm of scooping and batch baking?
Right. If you found that tedious, cookies might not be your passion.
Exactly. So moving on, we tackle the centerpiece. Cake. We suggest a one-bowl vanilla snack cake. No complicated layers, no massive mixer required.
This one is pure leavening study.
The core technique here is chemical leavening combined with emulsifying. Emulsifying is the art of getting ingredients that naturally repel each other, like oil and water, to mix smoothly and stay mixed, often using eggs as the mediator. This teaches you the critical impact of mixing order and how to achieve an even, tender crumb.
So if you enjoyed that process.
If you enjoy crafting a soft interior and watching that predictable, magnificent rise, your lane might be layer cakes and muffins. The question for you to ask is, did you enjoy crafting a soft interior and watching the rise?
Next, we move to pie and tart. But we avoid the stress of a deep-dish, fluted masterpiece and go for a rustic fruit galette, which is a free-form pie.
This takes all the pressure off of perfection and focuses on the tactile experience. The core technique is crust mixing and moisture control. You learn what pea-sized fat pieces feel like, how to handle cold dough, and the importance of minimal liquid when cutting butter into flour.
So this is about working with your hands.
It's fundamentally about working with your hands, keeping things cold and sculpting. The test question is, did you enjoy working with your hands and sculpting the dough? If you found that cold, floury, hands-on work satisfying, then pies, tarts, and biscuits might be your calling.
Okay, number 4 shifts gears entirely. Custards. An easy stovetop vanilla pudding.
No oven required for this one, but demands immense patience. The core technique is custard thickening, often achieved through egg yolks or cornstarch, heated very slowly. This forces patience and teaches you the rhythm of stirring and watching consistency shift.
You're watching chemistry unfold in real time.
You are. The mixture transitions from a thin liquid to a thick coat-the-spoon pudding right in front of your eyes. The test question, did you enjoy watching chemistry unfold gradually, and do you possess the patience for constant stirring? If yes, custards, curds, and sauces might be your specialty.
Number 5 brings us to pastries, but we use a critical beginner hack. Puff pastry cinnamon twist made with store-bought dough.
This avoids the massive time investment of lamination while teaching the essential handling skills.
Lamination being those hundreds of layers of butter and dough.
Which is very difficult to do from scratch. Using store-bought dough introduces the concepts. The core technique is rolling, shaping, and egg wash application. It teaches you to handle fragile dough and to focus on visual detail and consistency of shape. A little tip here. Look for all butter puff pastry if you can. The flavor difference is immense.
The test question. Did you enjoy the artistry and careful shaping involved in handling a fragile dough?
Exactly. And finally, sweetbreads. The ubiquitous, comforting banana bread.
This is often the first thing people ever bake.
It's so forgiving and flexible. The core technique is one-bowl mixing and mastering moist bakes. It teaches you how ripeness impacts texture and sweetness, and how to read internal texture cues, checking for doneness with a skewer, without just relying on how brown the outside looks.
It's low stress, high comfort.
It is. So the emotional test question here is, did you enjoy the smell, the patience of the long bake, and the cozy vibe it brought to your kitchen?
That sampler provides a full map of the terrain, but Val doesn't let the learner stop there.
No. Val proposes an optional but highly effective challenge, the 6-Bake Sprint Challenge.
What's the proposal?
Try all 6 of these recipes in a focused 2-week period. Once you complete the sprint, you have to perform 3 actions. First, pick one bake to master bake it again and achieve a flawless result.
Second,
Pick one bake to remix. Change the flavor. Add cocoa powder to the banana bread, or change the shape, like making the cake into cupcakes. And third, pick one bake to teach someone else.
that's brilliant. Mastering something simple, then expressing creativity through remixing, and then cementing the knowledge by teaching it forward.
Mastery is not about volume. It's about clarity of focus. This sprint provides that foundational clarity, and the challenge forces you to actively choose your area of passion, turning passive learning into active commitment.
So we've journeyed from the earliest sweetbreads of ancient Egypt through the profound historical costs of sugar's global expansion, past the codified precision of patisserie culture, and landed here with a strategic map for the intentional beginner.
And the ultimate goal is to move beyond that robotic adherence to a recipe and really understand the true alchemy of transformation.
That freedom, the freedom to improvise, to substitute, to recover mid-bake, it only comes from learning the why. If you understand the role of each ingredient, you are no longer a follower, you are a baker.
And let's reiterate those forces one last time. Gas creates the rise, providing lift.
Hmm.
Protein creates the scaffold, providing structure. Fat creates tenderness and richness by inhibiting gluten. And sugar retains moisture and aids in browning and flavor depth.
If you understand those four principles, you can step into any recipe or lack of one and approach it with the integrity of a true scientist.
Val's final wisdom is maybe the most profound, and it extends way beyond the kitchen. Baking teaches you to try, to taste, to try again. That's all life really
You
is.
don't need finesse yet, you just need follow through.
And remember, your effort is the recipe. The resulting structure, whether it's cracked, sunken, or perfect, is just honest feedback. You are performing a ritual of resilience every single time you turn on that oven.
Because every bake is, fundamentally, a love letter to the person you are becoming. You take these simple, often humble things, and you use attention and heat to create something beautiful, nourishing, and ultimately worth sharing. So we leave you with this final provocative thought. If you were to use baking to declare an intention, not just to decorate or satisfy a simple craving, what story would your next bake tell? Go forth and climb that mountain, one intentional bake at a time.